Let's pull up another of your messages. We've had so many this week asking various elements of this rescue going on in Chile. Jack on Facebook says, how did you keep your mind occupied and from panicking during your time in the collapsed mine? And of course, that question's for you, Stephen.
Not difficult. I think if anybody says that you don't panic during time, you do. You absolutely do panic, whether you know you are going to get out alive. The big thing is the camaraderie amongst the people. You'll sit, everybody sits, tells your whole life story. It's amazing how you can fabricate some extra bits into your life story when you've got a few days of nothing else to do. Yeah, you tell loads of stories about yourself, your friends, jokes, singing songs, keeping yourself very, very busy, and you try and avoid reality, I think. That's the only way to stop yourself panicking.
The idea of cracking jokes when you're trapped underground seems incredible, but as you say, it's happening. And looking at that video, which is still the most watched on bbcnews.com, it seems that in some ways those miners were having moments where they were enjoying each other's company under the ground in Chile. Let's bring up another message. Ibrahim in the UK has got in touch through worldhaveyoursay.com and says, can the experiences of astronauts help to deal with being stuck in enclosed areas for this such as a long time? Well, we have to turn to Dr Iya Whiteley because this is part of your job. Do you think it would be useful for someone like you to be talking to these miners now?
Well, I understand that the Chilean government has got in touch with NASA, so I think they're in good hands. ESA has also conducted studies into long-duration missions to the Moon and Mars. And you can imagine there are similarities. Of course, the difference is, again, that they're there by choice if they would go to a mission to the Moon or Mars, but here they're stuck. So there are a lot of similarities in terms of dealing with the darkness, being able to have a good sleep-awake cycle, being able to deal with hygiene, having regular routine, exercise, because that's important.
And I'm listening to you, and Alan, I'm thinking, well, some of these are lessons which every miner would have to learn, whether they're trapped or not. Do most miners receive training on how to deal with claustrophobia, how to deal with darkness before they go down a mine?
Not really specifically. You learn how to handle it. You're working in a claustrophobic area all the time, so it becomes almost natural. It's dark, it's dingy, it's wet, it's hot, and these are things that you just grow to cope with as you go. I think one thing we should try and make clear that the miners here, I don't think, are in a very tight space. They will have more room in the tunnels and drives that lead up to the chamber that they are using as a sanctuary at the moment, so they do have some room to maneuver and get out of each other's way for a little while.
And it has been interesting. A few days ago, the officials were saying they were living in 50 square metres. That video seems to suggest, and officials are agreeing, that it's nearer to 100 square metres. Still far from ideal, of course. Let's bring in an email from Gloria in Oregon. I think she posted this on the blog, actually, worldhaveyoursay.com. She says, will the temperature down where the miners are change over the next several weeks? Maybe, Alan, you could start on that, but Stephen may want to comment as well. But, Alan, does temperature change a lot in a mine?
Only when you induce strong ventilation. The rock temperature stays very constant. They will have reached a stable temperature, albeit high. One of the priorities, I would think, would be to try and get some extra ventilation down there to keep the miners relatively cool and keep the humidity down. Your temperature will stay virtually constant.
And at the moment, there are 3 narrow boreholes going down to the miners. One is for ventilation, one is for communication, and one is for food and water. Stephen, in your experience when you were trapped, were there big swings in temperature?
No, not at all. I think, you know, the previous view is quite right. I mean, your rock temperature remains fairly constant. You know, at those sort of depths, it's very difficult to change that rock temperature. The one concern that they should obviously just be careful of is that your air remains saturated, so that your cooling power of your air, obviously, as you sweat, you want fresh, dry air to remove the sweat, keep you cool. And as long as they've got sufficient flow, it'll do that. If they don't, your air becomes saturated and you get very hot and clammy, so it'll make it uncomfortable. But if they've got air movement, they'll be all right from the temperature control point of view.
And you didn't have to be an expert watching that video to realise how hot those Chilean miners were. All of them absolutely covered in sweat. Let's keep moving through these messages you're sending in. Bill is in Tennessee, getting in touch through Facebook. If they can get food and water in, why can't they get them out? This seems odd to me. Well, Alan, a number of people have mentioned this. If you can get a narrow borehole set up, Why can't you work with that borehole and widen it rather than start again?
It's a question of physics, really. You've just got to have sufficient space to be able to get a human being out. You need somewhere in the region of, in imperial terms, 2'6" to 3 foot diameter for a human body to be brought up through. They are using these holes mainly for supply of communications, food, etc. The hole that they're going to drill will have to be drilled away from the area that the men are staying at the moment, so that you don't cause huge problems with the rock that's going to go down to them. That's the chippings from the borehole. It's quite a complicated process. You have to put down a small hole to start with, about 9 inches in diameter, called a pilot hole, and then you're going to have to put down another drill head, which is going to be pushed down, guided by that pilot hole until they get to the bottom. And that amount of material is going to have to be moved away. So it's highly unlikely that they will do that into the area that the men are using as sanctuary.
Thank you very much indeed for answering that question. Dan Beach, let's remain optimistic and assume that these men are certain to get out. Do you worry not just for how they're coping psychologically now, but how they'll deal when they emerge, met by the expectations of their family and a waiting, well, not just a waiting country, a waiting world?
Yes, indeed. I think most of us are aware of the stresses that they're going to be under, that they are under underground. But once they emerge successfully, everyone is going to want a piece of them. They're going to be everyone is going to want first-hand information. Their families, their friends, news, media outlets. There'll probably be attorneys. There will probably be movie offers and that sort of thing. What these men are going to need is time to decompress emotionally from this experience. Asking all of these groups to back off for a while may be unrealistic, but I think that's what they're going to need.
Stephen, how did you, to use Dan's phrase, decompress? What did you do when you got out?
We actually had a really good management team that was leading the mine at that stage. And I was still living in Zimbabwe, and it was great. I mean, we came out, called into the general manager's office, and the general manager basically said, look, you know, really glad you're still okay, and we're going to send you back home to Zimbabwe. So I was put on an airplane, flown home, and I was given a couple of weeks off away from work, fully paid, which was also great. And time to be with my family, catch up with all your mates, and sort of talk about it away from the environment, which is, I think, going to be key for these guys as well, is to get away from the environment, to, you know, just totally switch off from that and get away from everybody in their face, I think, is going to be the big thing.
And here, while some people are obviously concerned with getting these men up to the surface, what would you be advising the Chilean authorities to do in terms of preparations for them coming back into the real world?
I think they would need to be prepared as families as well. So families would need to understand what the men went through, and being, I guess, wives and relatives in such profession, they would understand what has happened. But I think it's important that everyone is prepared, including the families.
Nadim's watching us in Pakistan. He's just sent this message. I would salute their mental and physical strength. They're heroes and human beings to the fore. I send our love from Pakistan. Ian, many thanks for coming in. Thanks to Alan Baxter as well, to Dan Beach in Chicago, and to Stephen Thomas, who is live from Barberton in South Africa. And, of course, to all of you who send in emails and questions. Of course, we're going to return to this on BBC World News. It's absolutely certain. I'll speak to you in a couple of hours on BBC World Service Radio. Goodbye.